The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everybody.
Before we get into tonight's stories, we have a bit of an update for you all. Usually, as you all know, we release our episodes on Wednesdays. But due to our busy lifestyles, we decided that starting May 15th, which is a Thursday, we will be releasing all of our episodes on Thursdays at 6 p.m. from now on.
So we just wanted to give you a heads up in case next week on Wednesday you were looking for the episode and wondering where it is. It'll be there, but on Thursday instead.
Yeah, we haven't quit or anything like that. We just decided that one extra day to help us get the episodes together really would be a little bit of a relief for us.
It would be very helpful, I have to say.
We have a couple great stories for you tonight, and I'm excited to get into mine.
Well, why don't you go first tonight then?
All right. I think I'll do just that. We don't have any other housekeeping to do.
No, I don't think so.
So sit back, get comfy, and let's get into it. According to Ohio's Warren County Historical Archives, in May of 1882, the Western Star ran a rather alarming article which began, quote, Waynesville, Ohio, May 29. Although this is an old settled neighborhood, and the primitive snakes in the main have long since disappeared, except the black garter and the rattlesnake, and occasionally some of the other species, we are once in a while greeted with the report of some monster of this uncanny tribe, end quote. The article goes on to say that for many years, the people of Crosswick, a small town north of Waynesville, had been seeing strange tracks left by some sort of unknown creature. But they assumed it was from a rather large snake. One resident, a Mr. John Lynch, had two sons, Ed, who was 13, and Joe, who was 11. The brothers had gone fishing at a small creek, just south of the village, on May 28th. After, quote, sitting on the bank a short time, they heard quite a stir among some old reeds, grass, and brush behind them. And on looking round, they saw a huge monster approaching them rapidly. They screamed, and, paralyzed almost with horror, they started to run. When the snake, or whatever it might be, for they never saw aught like it before, came close up to the older one, and suddenly throwing out two long arms, or forelegs, seized the boy in its slimy embrace, simultaneously producing two more legs, about 4 feet long, from some mysterious hiding place in its body, and dragged the boy some 100 yards down the creek to a large sycamore, 26 feet in diameter at the base, hollow, and with a large opening on one side. Through this aperture, the monster attempted to enter with the boy, who by this time was almost dead with fright and unable to make any resistance, end quote. 3 men came to the rescue, and the creature, whatever it was, got away. Before long, a posse of 60 men were on the hunt, vowing to kill the terrifying beast, which the article described as, quote, 30 to 40 feet long, 16 inches in diameter, and the legs 4 feet long, covered with scales the same as the body. Feet about 12 inches long and shaped like a lizard's, of black and white color with large spots. Head about 16 inches wide with a long black forked tongue and the mouth inside deep red. The hind legs appeared to be used to give it an erect position, and its propelling power is in its tail." End quote. Young Ed Lynch had suffered terrible bruises and some scratches. But worse than that, he was delirious with fear and had both convulsions and spasms for hours afterwards. The massive beast, part salamander and part serpent, came to be known as the Crosswick Monster. Now, the Crosswick Monster was never seen again after that day in May of 1882. But since there were over 60 witnesses by the end of that day, it's still considered to be one of the most believable and substantiated cryptid cases in U.S. history. So tonight, I'm going to tell you all about the terrifying Crosswick Monster. Crosswick, or Crosswicks, Ohio, is a tiny, unincorporated town in Wayne Township, Ohio. It lies just outside the town of Waynesville, where Bellbrook Road meets Old Stage Road. Crosswick wasn't listed on any Ohio maps until 1821, and I had a really hard time finding any information about how it began or who its first settler was. In fact, even today, Crosswick has zero online presence. There is no town website that I could find, and not a single image of the area came up when I searched. Wikipedia has only 3 sentences about it, and they're pretty much everything I've already told you before. The only other bit of information that I could find about Crosswick was from the 1882 Western Star article. Most of the residents at that time were black.
Which is interesting, but also kind of strange, because you would think if it was an all-black town in 1882, that someone somewhere would have some sort of historical archives about this town.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. But it appears that it's just fallen off the face of the earth, this place.
As far as historical stuff and online stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that's very strange.
Nearby Waynesville, which was named after Revolutionary War General Mad Anthony Wayne, has a population of just over 2,800 people. It was founded in 1797 and calls itself both the antiques capital of the Midwest and the most haunted town in the entire state of Ohio. And in 1972, just 24 miles away, another cryptid was spotted, the Loveland Frogman, which we covered in episode 103. So Crosswick just happens to be right in the middle of an area known for supernatural things. According to lovelandroar.com, brothers Ed and Joe Lynch were fishing on May 28, 1882, when they started to hear rustling in the reeds along the riverbank behind them. When they turned around, they saw an incredible creature. It was like a giant snake, 30 feet long, with black and white stripes and yellow spots. The creature charged at them, and the 2 boys screamed as they tried to get away. But the Crosswick Monster easily overtook them, and before Ed knew what was happening, the creature threw out 2 impossibly large arms and grabbed him. Then 2 more legs seemed to appear from inside of its body, and the creature used all 4 legs to begin dragging Ed 100 yards across the ground to a sycamore tree. Both boys continued to scream out of sheer terror, and 3 men working at the quarry not far from the river could hear them. The 3 men, Reverend Jacob Horn and George Peterson and Alan Jordan, came running. All 3 of the men witnessed Ed being dragged towards the tree by this incredibly powerful lizard. The tree was hollowed out at the bottom, and it seemed as if the monster planned on pulling Ed into the hole. The 3 men ran towards the monster, yelling and waving their arms. The creature dropped Ed and disappeared inside the tree. The men carried Ed home to his father, and then the 2 of them ran to Waynesville for the doctor. Dr. L.C. Lukens treated him for heavy bruises, deep scratches, and shock. He said the boy was expected to fully recover, but that he was suffering from convulsions and spasms as his body tried to make sense of what had happened. His 3 rescuers, Reverend Horn, Peterson, and Jordan, headed out to form a posse, track down the creature, and kill it before it could attack anyone else. According to WNewsJ.com, 60 local men, armed with clubs, axes, pitchforks, and their hunting dogs, went directly to the sycamore tree. Several of the men began hacking at the tree with their hatchets. The Warren County Museum site says it was their intention to cut it down and kill the beast hiding within it. They didn't get very far when the Crosswick Monster, which was hiding much higher up on the tree, leaped down on them. When it hit the ground, the beast reared up on its hind legs, standing as tall as 12 or 14 feet tall. Then it ran, on just 2 legs, but as fast as a racehorse. The men chased it across the creek and up a small hill. They thought that perhaps they had cornered it when it came to a fence, except for the fact that it jumped right over it and kept going. Some of the men continued chasing it north for a mile before it disappeared into a large hole in a hill, surrounded by a ledge of heavy rocks. The creature was truly terrifying. The men said that it was 30 to 40 feet long and at least 12 feet high when it stood upright. Its body was covered in black and white reptilian scales with yellow spots and was about 16 inches in diameter. Its legs were each 4 feet long. Its head was 16 inches wide, and the inside of its mouth was bright red with a long greenish forked tongue. The bravest of the men entered the cave for as far as they could, but the creature was nowhere to be found. And then they searched for any other exits and found none. As far as they could figure out, the Crosswick Monster had gone deep underground where it belonged. And perhaps it did, because it was never seen again. Ed Lynch eventually recovered from his injuries, although he refused to go fishing for a very long time.
Understandable.
That it is. And that, remarkably, is the end of the Crosswick Monster. Now, I tried to find out anything that I could about Dr. L.C. Lukens of Waynesville and Reverend Jacob Horn. But other than stories about the monster, their names aren't online anywhere. But please keep in mind that this was a black community in 1882. So perhaps that's the reason why information is so scarce. But then again, you also have to figure that the town doctor and a clergyman were very prominent and respected men in the community. So I doubt either of them would be mixed up in some sort of hoax. So that begs the question, what did all of these people see? What did they experience? Experts and people who know their giant lizards have suggested that the Crosswick Monster was a monitor lizard. There are 80 different known species of monitor lizard. The largest of them all, the Megalania, may have grown as long as 23 feet. But that particular species went extinct 50,000 years ago. Some species are striped, and some have spots, which matches the witness's description. The most well-known today is probably the Komodo dragon. Komodo dragons can grow as long as 10 feet, and with their long necks and powerful tails and claws, they're pretty intimidating. All monitor lizards are carnivorous, and they all have venomous bites. So, when you look at it that way, it is possible that the Crosswick Monster was a monitor lizard. And it would definitely explain why Ed Lynch was having convulsions and spasms after he was dragged towards the tree. He was suffering from the effects of a monitor lizard's venom.
But can I just point something out? Have you ever known a monitor lizard to get up on 2 feet and run as fast as a racehorse?
No. They're not known to do that.
I didn't think so.
So there's only two problems with that theory. First, the majority of monitor lizards don't grow beyond 7 feet, a huge difference from the 30 to 40 feet that the witnesses described. And second, monitor lizards are native to Africa and Asia. So how would one end up in the woods of Ohio in 1882? Some people have suggested that it was somebody's exotic pet. Now, it is true that exotic pets were a popular trend in the late 1800s. Usually they were parrots or monkeys. But on occasion, a flying squirrel, hedgehog, or badger would be kept as a pet. But with that said, you would think that if someone in the area had a monitor lizard, no matter how big it was, it'd be common knowledge. You would have to imagine with a pet like that the word would get around and people would be talking about it all over.
Oh, definitely. Kids would be peeking in the windows trying to see it.
Yeah, that would be an incredible pet to have.
Right.
So let's assume that the Crosswick Monster was an actual monster of the cryptid variety, one that came out and attacked two boys and then disappeared inside a cave, never to be seen again. It's a great story. But the residents of Milton, Kentucky, might argue that it did reappear in the summer of 1975. In July of 1975, Clarence Tuffy Cable was walking through his junkyard north of Milton. He was the co-manager of the Bluegrass Body Shop. As he walked past the junk cars, a 15-foot lizard came out from behind some of the cars and hissed at him several times. He said that it had big eyes that looked frog-like, and that it was black and white striped with spots. On July 27th, Tuffy's brother Garrett was in the junkyard when he saw a pile of old car hoods begin to vibrate on the ground. Then, a massive lizard began to emerge from underneath them. Terrified, Garrett ran to get his brother and his gun. But when they returned, armed and ready to shoot, the creature was gone. The next day, Tuffy saw the lizard once again, although this time it was even bigger, which led him to believe that they weren't dealing with one creature, but two. He picked up a large rock and threw it at the lizard, which hissed before disappearing into some nearby brush. Tuffy returned within minutes with his rifle, which he fired into the brush, but he couldn't be sure if the creature was even still there. In August, concerned citizens formed a search party and tried to hunt down the lizard, although they didn't find any evidence whatsoever that it existed at all. But the Cable brothers insisted that they'd seen what they had seen, and in a Trimble Banner article, Tuffy theorized that perhaps both lizards had been brought into the junkyard in one of the recently arrived cars, and because they were slowly clearing out their merchandise, the two monitor lizards had fewer places to hide. Now, of course, some people speculated that the Crosswick Monster and the Milton lizard could have been related. But how a 30-foot lizard from 1882 could have spawned two smaller lizards that still existed almost 100 years later is a bit of a mystery, especially since monitor lizards rarely live past 30 years, with most of them having a lifespan of about 8 years.
Well, then that would make it unlikely, wouldn't it?
Well, you would think so, but unlikely and impossible are two different things.
Well, this is true.
And although unlikely, that doesn't make it impossible. I mean, when you think about it, there are many species out there that we didn't think existed anymore, that they were extinct. So, I guess you could say that it was unlikely and impossible, but here they are.
Well, I had just told you earlier today about the snake that they just discovered that was eating a hawk. And that's a brand new species of snake that they never knew existed. So who knows what was wandering around in 1882?
Yeah, there's really no telling what these people saw, but I find them highly believable.
I do too.
Well, there you have it, everyone. The Crosswick Monster. And we'll return with Beth's story after this short break.
Hey, did you know? After a French shipwreck off the coast of England during the Napoleonic Wars, the only survivor was in deep trouble. The law at the time was that anyone in French military uniform would be hanged, and this survivor most certainly was dressed that way. The only problem? He was a monkey. The British locals decided to hang the potential spy anyway, but it didn't go so well. The monkey did what he was best at. He continuously climbed the hangman's rope until he escaped. Who'd have thunk it?
All right, we're back, and I cannot wait to see what Beth is going to share for her story tonight.
Well, I want to know before we start, did you ever have to read Dracula in school?
No, I didn't have to, but at a very early age, I was into making monster models and things like that. And I picked up a copy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I picked up Dracula, and they were interesting.
Yeah, the first time I ever read Dracula, I was in high school, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And then when Francis Ford Coppola's movie version came out, the one with Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder, I was completely obsessed with that movie. And because it starts with a reference to Vlad Tepes, I read everything I could possibly find about him. And I thought someday I was going to go visit Romania. But I never made it to Romania. But my love for vampire lore still hasn't gone away. So, luckily, not long after my introduction to Dracula, I was introduced to Lestat and Anne Rice's entire vampire world in Interview with the Vampire. I was totally hooked on that series. And then there was Anno Dracula by Kim Newman, which is one of the most brilliant vampire books ever written, in my humble opinion. And I won't give it away, but if you ever get a chance to read that one, it's incredible. It basically imagines what London would have been like if Van Helsing had never vanquished Dracula at all. And as far as vampire movies, if it had a vampire in it, I'd watch it. From Underworld to Blade to Daybreakers to even the more artsy stuff like Shadow of the Vampire. And then recently, you and I both watched What We Do in the Shadows.
That was my favorite movie.
Series.
Well, there was the movie and there was the series.
Well, true. But I like the series better than the movie.
Yeah, the series was really good, but the movie was awesome.
They were all awesome because they had vampires in them. And the thing is, there's no shortage of vampires in literature or movies. There's 759 novels featuring vampires, and there's over 200 movies that star vampires as major characters. But for me, Bram Stoker's Dracula is still the best vampire book that there could ever possibly be, because there are just so many cool things about it. Like, the first time Stoker's publisher read his manuscript, he wrote a single word at the top of the page. No. According to Time magazine, in the summer of 1890, 45-year-old Bram Stoker, and Bram, by the way, is short for Abraham, arrived in Whitby, London. Stoker was an Irishman, and although he had published several short stories, his main form of employment at that time was as a personal assistant to actor Sir Henry Irving and as the business manager of the Lyceum Theatre in London. He was also a distant relative of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. But Stoker wasn't in Whitby to promote a play or to meet with Sir Conan Doyle. He was there to do research. After checking out a book about Wallachia and visiting the Whitby Museum's map archives, he charted his own map from Whitby to Romania, tracing the path that his protagonist, Jonathan Harker, would take. But then Stoker wandered down to Whitby Harbor, where something really interesting happened. He talked to some Royal Coast Guard members who told him about the strange wreck of the Dimitri, which had come from Varna, Bulgaria. 5 years earlier, the Russian schooner had been caught in a really bad storm and ran aground in the harbor. When rescuers went out to help, they discovered that most of the crew had perished, and the ship was carrying nothing but crates of earth. Before they could investigate further, a massive black dog came bounding off the ship and took off running. It bounded up the 199 steps from the beach to higher ground with ease, and then disappeared within the graveyard of St. Mary's Church. Now that was more than enough to get Stoker's wheels turning. A wrecked ship carrying crates full of earth, and then a hellhound to boot? It was the stuff of nightmares. Whether the Coast Guard was pulling his leg, or whether they really didn't know that the crates of earth were really silver sand, a type of fine sand made of quartz used in gardening and in paving stones, doesn't really matter. What mattered was that Stoker now had a means for his Dracula to arrive in England. The Dimitri became the Demeter, the ship that carried his vampire count in his Wallachian earth-filled coffin to Europe. The book on Wallachia from the Whitby Library had also stoked his imagination because he had read a little bit about Vlad Tepes. Allegedly. It's been said for a long time now that Vlad Tepes was the inspiration for Dracula. I think most people know the basic story, but I'll sum it up really quickly. Vlad Tepes, or Vlad the Impaler, ruled Wallachia off and on from 1448 to 1476. His father, Vlad II, was in constant struggle against the Ottoman Empire, and to show his loyalty at one point, he sent Vlad Tepes and his younger brother to the Ottoman Sultan as collateral. Vlad Tepes was there for years. Vlad II had also joined the Order of the Dragon and added Dracul to the end of his title, which made Vlad Tepes Dracula, son of the dragon. Vlad Tepes was finally allowed to return home in 1448, only to find out that the Ottomans had killed his father and his older brother a full year earlier. This was when Vlad Tepes went on his infamous violent rampage, killing his enemies by impaling them on long spikes to prolong their agony. It was a horrendous way to die. It's said that in 1462, he left one battlefield strewn with 1,000 impaled bodies, almost all of which still cried out in excruciating pain. Vlad Tepes died in battle in 1476. But I've often wondered how Bram Stoker jumped from Vlad the Impaler to Vlad the Vampire. I never really understood the connection, if I'm being honest. And it turns out some scholars have had a completely different take on where Dracula came from. Scholars like Elizabeth Miller point out that Stoker had never been to Transylvania or Romania. And just to be clear, Wallachia was a region that included parts of both of those modern-day countries. And the only note Stoker made about the word Dracula in his notes was this, quote, Dracula in Wallachian language means devil. Wallachians were accustomed to give it as a surname to any person who rendered himself conspicuous, either by courage, cruel actions, or cunning, end quote. That's it. Stoker didn't make a single note about Vlad Tepes. He may have never even heard of him. So, where did all the vampire stuff come from? Well, Bram Stoker was Irish, and Ireland had its own bloodthirsty tyrant, Abertoch. Stoker was good friends with fellow writer Oscar Wilde. In fact, Stoker's wife was Wilde's former girlfriend. He spent a lot of time at the Wilde home, and some experts believe he first heard the legend of Abertoch from Oscar Wilde's mother. According to IrishMyths.com, one version of the legend goes that there was once a Celtic chieftain named Abertoch that was so hated that the peasants attempted to kill him several times. Each time they believed he'd been slain, he would seemingly rise from the dead and demand bowls of blood in compensation. Convinced that Abertoch was the walking dead, a neighboring chieftain sought the advice of a Druid priest. The priest said that the peasants must run the tyrant through with a sword made of yew wood, bury the body upside down, surround his grave with thorns, and then place a large rock over the top. They did, and Abertoch never rose again. I mean, when you think about it, this story sounds a lot more like Dracula than Vlad Tepes. And it's easy to see how Stoker may have altered it. Instead of a sword made of wood, there's a wooden stake. And it's not much of a leap to go from bowls of human blood to the neck of the actual source. According to Time magazine, when Stoker wrote his first manuscript of Dracula, he intended for it to be taken as a true story. He added all kinds of factual elements to make it believable to the reader. He even wrote that he personally knew many of the characters involved, that both Jonathan and Mina Harker and Dr. Seward were all based on very real people that he knew. There was only one problem. Jack the Ripper was stalking the streets of Whitechapel and committing heinous murders. Stoker's editor was so concerned that readers would be thrown into a full-on panic if they read Dracula and thought it was true, that he wrote that one-word critique, "No," at the top of the first page. He said it either had to be presented as fiction or not at all. The first published draft in May of 1897 was drastically different. The epilogue was shortened, and the death of Dracula had been written in. It's estimated tens of thousands of words were cut, and originally Dracula wasn't supposed to die. But apparently, Stoker left tons of clues that can allow historians to piece it all back together. There's a first edition that was published in Iceland that has most of the original text. There's also Dracula's Guest and Other Weird Tales. Published by Stoker's widow, Florence, in 1914, 2 years after Bram Stoker's death, Dracula's Guest has long been suspected as the original first chapter of Dracula. Florence wrote in the preface that it's an episode of Dracula that was removed due to the novel's excessive length. But the weirdest clue of all was the original manuscript that was discovered in a barn in the 1980s, in Pennsylvania, of all places. How it got there is a complete mystery, and what it was missing was even more puzzling. You see, this manuscript was discovered by a tax lawyer who immediately sold it to Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen. And all we really know about the original manuscript is this. The beginning of the novel, as we all know it, is actually page 102. The original first 101 pages had been completely cut out. Dracula's Guest, if that really is the first chapter, is only 18 pages long. So what the heck did the other 83 pages say? And what else does the Pennsylvania Barn Discovery version say? What's still in that version that wasn't ultimately cut before it was first published? Unfortunately, we may never know, because Paul Allen hasn't shared it. Well, he has, but those few people were asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement beforehand. For someone who loves Dracula as much as I do, the idea that a different original version is out there is just fascinating to me. But I also think the published version is pretty darn near perfect in every single way.
Wow, that's so freaking cool. I would love to know what's in those pages.
The ones that Paul Allen has?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. And the thing is that Dracula is in the public domain. So anybody can read the entire novel online. And if you buy it, you really are just giving the publisher money.
Right.
Right? But the version that he has is not online anywhere.
Nobody's seen it before.
Right. He's the only person on the planet that has access to this one original copy.
That's sad.
It is, in a way. I mean, that's...
But it could ruin a lot of things for a lot of people that love Dracula, too. You never know what's in there.
Right, because it's not what we all know and love. And to think that there's over 100 pages that were just ripped out of the beginning, I mean, we were never going to know what those 100 pages said.
No, not unless they're found in someone's attic or another barn in Pennsylvania.
I know. And, you know, for somebody who tried for many years to get an agent and be published that way, and all the rejection letters that I've gotten, I mean, I can't imagine that's all his editor put at the very top was just, no.
Yeah, it's pretty insulting.
Yeah. Yeah, rewrite it as fiction or we're not publishing it.
Yeah, that's the sad part about publishing sometimes. They want to make your story their story, more or less.
Well, yeah, to make money.
Yeah. It shouldn't be that way, though. If you got a great story, it should be out there for people to judge.
True. But I can also understand not wanting to put all of London in a complete panic when they already had Jack the Ripper out there and he was very real.
What's one more? Really, at that point, you're already scared to death. You gonna put a vampire on top of that?
I bet people would start, writing letters to the editor about how Dracula should really be going after Jack the Ripper and that they would be the ultimate showdown.
So there was no mention of garlic. I wonder when garlic came into play.
That's more of a 1960s kind of thing. And also, in Dracula, he has wolves around, but he doesn't transform into a wolf or anything like that. That was later.
Well, that's when he became friends with the Wolfman.
True.
I love the old movies. My God, they don't make them like they used to.
No, and just the way they'd use lighting, right? Yeah. So you've got Bela Lugosi as a vampire, and just the way they would light his eyes and leave the rest of his face in shadow.
Right.
Like, that was just brilliant.
I mean, I grew up on The Creature of the Black Lagoon, The Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein, and they were all in Abbott and Costello's movies.
Which you made me watch.
Right. So if you were a kid, you saw all these fictional characters.
Yeah. There was the Mummy, too.
There was the Mummy.
Yeah. Well, everybody, I hope you found it as interesting as I did. I don't know. I just think it's cool.
It's very cool. Well, there you have it. The Crosswick Monster and Bram, Stoker's Dracula.
Some secrets of Dracula.
Yeah. Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.